In 2019, Bittboy released a successor/upgraded model to their budget retro handheld, the PocketGo. The new PocketGo, also known as the PocketGo V2, added a bigger display, additional buttons, a joystick, and much better internals. Coming into 2020, Bittboy decided to refresh their flagship by addressing a few common complaints with the original model, while also changing a few other features. What's the difference between these two models? Visually, both versions of the new PocketGo, versions 2 and versions 2.1, look very similar. The only immediate difference is the color of the A, B, X, Y buttons, but even that is user replaceable, and each version comes with both sets of buttons if you are courageous enough to swap them out. There is a new dedicated reset button on versions 2.1 on the bottom of the handheld, but that's the only new hardware feature. When you pick up each device, you'll immediately notice the slick, shiny plastic housing of version 2.1 compared to the matte, slightly textured finish of the original model. This should make version 2.1 slightly less likely to collect finger oils and discolor over time, but it does make it a little bit harder to grip, and it does tend to highlight imperfections. The controls also got an update as well, having shorter travel distance and overall less stiff feeling to them. You will still need to break in the buttons a bit since, fresh out of the box, some only respond to firm presses, but this generally goes away quickly. Version 2.1 also has a different joystick mechanism and does come with this nice yellow grip cover. Although it seems to catch on something internal. And sadly, both joysticks still rotate. The screens and glass covering between the units are identical, 320 by 240, and are bright and vivid, with version 2.1 being slightly more flush with the body overall. My version 2.1 model does have a little bit more light bleed in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, but your mileage may vary. One nice improvement is in the USB-C port. The port in version 2.1 is now flush with the housing instead of being slightly recessed, and that should improve longevity and can now actually support a wider variety of USB chargers. Using a USB-C fast charger from a laptop will not charge version 2, but powers up version 2.1 no problem. Both versions have identical dual microSD card slots with 32 gigabytes pre-installed. The batteries are identical, the headphone jack, and the mono speaker. That mono speaker can get very loud, but one common complaint with the original version 2 model is its minimum volume is still quite loud, and version 2.1 is no different. If you're playing in an area with background noise, you may not notice it so much, but in quiet environments, the speaker can still sound slightly obnoxious at minimum volumes. Luckily, some games and emulators have the internal volume control, which can help alleviate the issue, but hopefully a software fix can deal with this in the future. The addition of a reset button on version 2.1 is definitely a nice addition, but strangely comes at a cost. On version 2, you have a power button and a menu button, each with its own function. On version 2.1, though, the menu button now does nothing, and the power button acts as power and as a menu button. So technically, even though version 2.1 has an additional physical button, each version has the same number of usable buttons. In the end, it's not a big deal, but odd that the physical button still exists on version 2.1, it just goes unlabeled and unused. The software in both units is very much identical, but also very much incompatible with each other. You can't swap the boot cards between each device and get any results. Funnily enough, the lack of compatibility was done to increase to version 2.1's compatibility. Both versions have the same processors, RAM, etc., but version 2.1 was altered to be compatible with the RG350, meaning anything designed to run on the RG350 should run correctly on the latest PocketGo. Since the RG350's community is much larger and more developed, this is a boon for Bittboy's latest handheld, and while it should be relatively easy for a programmer at least to edit firmware and drivers, etc. to run on version 2, and many applications work out of the box, this is a big win for version 2.1. Hopefully this helps version 2.1 have a community staying power since, as of now, the default firmware is slightly finicky, and on occasion I've had to use the reset button several times to get it to the boot screen. Performance is identical between the two devices, unsurprisingly, and both have the same JZ4770 and 512 megabytes of RAM, so anything 32-bit or lower should have no issues providing a smooth experience. GBA, Mega Drive, Neo-Geo, etc. all play at full speed without frame skip, although some chip-heavy games like Super Mario World 2 may need a tiny bit of coaxing with frame skip. PS1 is the limit in performance, which is common on devices in this category, though most games stick close to 60 FPS with the rare exception. Which emulator you use can vary the results greatly, so if the game is running slow, see if there is another emulator option. Both handhelds come with games and emulators pre-installed, so you are ready to go right out of the box, though what is pre-installed by default changes somewhat between devices. Either case, the heavy hitters are here: NES, SNES, GBA, Game Boy, Genesis, Neo-Geo, Neo-Geo Pocket, FBA, MAME, DosBox, Wonderswan, and PS1. The list of free games is a little less uniform between the devices, but both have good options like Free Doom and Open Tyrian. Some emulators do have additional options on the newer version 2.1 device, despite the emulator versions being the same, like image scaling being completely absent from RGBA on version 2, but I'm not sure if this is a product of the RG350 compatibility or a slightly nerfed version that's included in the version 2 device. With all that being said, this is an excellent $70 retro handheld. It can play virtually everything from the 32-bit era and older at native resolutions and full speed. Some will bemoan the lack of the second joystick like on the RG350, but dual sticks didn't really become needed until the PS2 era. Most of the upgrades between the two new PocketGos are cosmetic in nature, but the added software compatibility and the better USB-C support makes this version the best one to get. There are a few issues that hopefully will be addressed, like the difficulty first booting and the minimum volume levels, but neither of these are deal breakers for me. Hopefully Bittboy will continue to make new models and add in higher resolution screen and N64 support for version 3.